For 30 years, Johnny Carson's desk was more than television furniture. It was a national stage. People tuned in for the monologue, the guests, the way a raised eyebrow could turn a joke into an instant cultural reference. But that stage also caught the country off guard. At times, it brought laughter. At other times, it broadcast moments that now, plainly and without euphemism, read as racist. This is a careful look at 7 guests and 7 types of appearances on Carson's show where the humor, the language, or the politics cross lines that today we clearly label racist. I'm not here to conjure character assassinations. I'm here to place documented moments into context. These were instances, some a single remark, some recurring patterns, some defensive appeals to tradition that reveal how mainstream entertainment normalized harmful ideas about race. The guests we examine are familiar figures: John Wayne, Bob Hope, Charlton Heston, Don Rickles, Burt Reynolds, Red Skelton, and Buddy Hackett. Each name carries a career of achievement. Each, at different times, brought material or public comments to Carson's stage that historians, journalists, and audiences have since described as racist, racially insensitive, or rooted in racial stereotyping. Below, we walk through those moments, explore how Carson responded, and consider what those moments tell us about television and American culture. 1. John Wayne, a public quote that changed how people saw him. Few celebrities mattered more to mid-century America than John Wayne. He was a cinematic symbol of rugged masculinity and frontier mythology. But in 1971, a published interview with Wayne produced a line that shocked many: "I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility." That phrase, widely reported and widely criticized, moved Wayne from folk hero territory into a more fraught moral space. When Wayne later appeared on Carson's show, viewers watched closely. He rarely spoke the same incendiary lines on late-night television, but his public reputation had shifted. Archivists and TV historians note that Carson's demeanor with Wayne cooled after the interview. Where camaraderie once dominated the interviews, later exchanges displayed smaller smiles and a more guarded tone. Why does this matter? Because The Tonight Show functioned as a national living room. A leading figure endorsing white supremacist ideas, even off-air, reverberated. Carson's non-confrontational handling reflected both his personal interviewing style and the network's reluctance to stage on-air moral reckonings with long-standing icons. Still, the fact that such a quote existed and that it became part of Wayne's public record turned every subsequent media appearance into evidence of a racist stance that audiences could not easily shrug off. 2. Bob Hope, comedy traditions that relied on racial caricature. Bob Hope was a titan of American comedy, vaudeville roots, USO tours, radio, movies, television. Yet his early career, like many of that generation, included routines that relied on racial caricature, blackface-era conventions, and broad ethnic stereotyping. Historians point out that in Hope's early years, such material was routine. By the 1970s and 80s, it no longer fit. On Carson's couch, Hope sometimes dipped back into old habits. He would make jokes that leaned on national stereotypes or imitative accents. Occasionally, roast-style gags slipped into territory younger audiences judged unfair and racist. Carson's reaction was telling. Often a tight smile, a quick pivot, an attempt to move the conversation forward without endorsing the joke. Over time, producers would suppress or avoid repeating the most problematic bits. That administrative action, pulling a segment from reruns or banning a routine, is a blunt indicator. What once played as acceptable humor was now being recognized as racist material that shouldn't circulate unexamined. Hope's Tonight Show appearances thus become case studies in how comedians from older entertainment traditions collided with a more racially aware public. 3. Charlton Heston, political conservatism, dismissal, and racially charged rhetoric. Charlton Heston's stature came from epic films and a booming presence on screen. Later, his prominence moved into political activism. As his public profile shifted, so did his rhetoric, especially around issues that intersected with race, civil rights, law and order, and critiques of activism. Heston's public statements and leadership roles in conservative movements drew criticism for language that minimized systemic racism or portrayed civil rights demands as overblown. When such positions surfaced in media interviews, they often sounded dismissive of legitimate grievances voiced by Black and minority communities. On Carson's show, producers sometimes steered conversations toward nostalgia and away from politics. Carson himself generally avoided extended political sparring. But when Heston or similarly placed figures used language that downplayed systemic inequality, viewers felt the weight of that rhetoric. These are not abstract concerns. Political commentary that reframes systemic discrimination as a solved problem or the complaints of whiners has real-world consequences. It shapes policy debates, public sympathy, and the perceived legitimacy of social movements. Because Heston's positions were influential, their appearance on a major entertainment platform like Carson's show helped normalize certain dismissive, racially tinged narratives. For Don Rickles, insult comedy that normalized racial slurs. Don Rickles made a career of savage, no-holds-barred insult comedy. His rapid-fire, everybody-is-fair-game approach delivered laughs and occasional gasps, often from the same audience. But his material sometimes included racial slurs and stereotypes that, even when framed as equal opportunity roasting, reinforced harmful images. Comedy historians and many contemporary viewers point to specific instances where Rickles used language that would be unacceptable as mainstream humor today. The famous paradox of Rickles is that he maintained friendships with performers from a wide array of backgrounds, even as he targeted them with biting, racially themed jokes. That relationship complexity sparked a long debate in comedy scholarship. Does proximity to one's targets justify public use of slurs and stereotypes? On Carson's show, Rickles' appearances were electric and volatile. Carson often laughed, but producers and staff sometimes drew a line. There are well-documented backstage accounts of Carson telling staff to cut away if certain slurs were used. Those behind-the-scenes moments underscore a central truth. Live late-night broadcasts could enable the normalization of racist language unless production intervened. 5. Burt Reynolds' charm, Southern roots, and occasional racist jokes. Burt Reynolds was charisma personified, and that charm made his late-night interviews magnetic. But Reynolds also brought an upbringing from a segregated South and an era that normalized certain kinds of jokes that relied on stereotypes. On occasion, Reynolds' unscripted remarks veered into racially insensitive territory, moments that generated considerable viewer complaints at a time when audiences had to write letters to register their outrage. One notorious segment elicited hundreds of complaints after Reynolds made dismissive comments and jokes about Native Americans. Carson's response was not to publicly scold Reynolds. Rather, in an effort to manage fallout, producers removed the material from reruns and discouraged repeating the bit. Again, the show's response, behind the scenes, signals recognition. These were not harmless slips, but racist moments with measurable audience impact. Reynolds' case illustrates how charm and likability can obscure the harm of a comment. A popular performer's throwaway joke can still perpetuate stereotypes and validate disrespect toward entire communities. 6. Red Skelton, a vaudeville legacy wedded to minstrel traditions. Red Skelton's gift for character comedy was enormous. He crafted performers and narratives that delighted millions. But his early work, like that of many performers who rose through vaudeville and early television, made use of racist tropes, blackface traditions, caricatured dialects, and minstrel-derived characters. Those traditions don't translate well to later decades. Skelton sometimes defended his material as part of comedy history. Critics countered that defending minstrel-era routines ignores the real harm done by mocking marginalized people. On Carson's program, when Skelton revisited older bits or defended tradition, the audience reaction was often tepid. Carson would politely steer away, but the evidence remained on tape. These were routines with roots in explicitly racist forms of entertainment. Historians use Skelton's television appearances to show how early 20th century comedic practices persisted into late-night TV and how audiences grew less tolerant as awareness of the racist origins of those forms increased. 7. Buddy Hackett, refusing to evolve, leaning on racial stereotypes. Buddy Hackett's nimble face and stage manner made him a favorite among comics, but his act also included persistent reliance on ethnic jokes and stereotypes that many in comedy circles later regarded as unacceptable. Unlike some peers who revised material to meet changing standards, Hackett often doubled down, famously resisting pressure to update his routines. Carson's producers eventually took the rare step of banning a particularly problematic routine from ever airing again after a mid-1970s segment drew a flood of complaints. That step was unusual for The Tonight Show. It signals how blatant and persistent some of Hackett's racial material had become. This tension, a comic refusing to adapt while audiences demand change, represents the wider cultural moment in which television moved from permissive repetition of harmful tropes toward accountability. These 7 guests and the moments they brought to Johnny Carson's stage are not chosen to defame or to erase accomplishment. They are chosen because they are instructive. They show how mainstream entertainment helped normalize racist language, stereotypes, and dismissive attitudes across decades. There are a few clear takeaways. 1. Racist language and jokes were not always hidden. They were part of mainstream entertainment. That normalization had consequences. It shaped how entire populations perceived marginalized groups. 2. 3. Carson's strategy was usually restraint and redirection rather than confrontation. That choice preserved a certain civility on air, but also meant some racist moments aired without strong public rebuke. 4. 5. Television evolved slowly, and institutional responses were imperfect. Pulling segments from reruns or banning routines were corrective steps, but they often came after harm had already been broadcast to millions. 6. 7. Context matters. Many of these performers were products of eras in which racist practices were normalized, acknowledging that history does not excuse the harm, but it helps explain why change took time. 8. We call these moments racist because they relied on racist language, caricature, or dismissive rhetoric that reinforced inequality. Calling them that helps us learn. It helps historians document cultural shifts, and it helps current viewers understand why representation and sensitivity in media are not optional niceties. They are necessary corrections to a long history of harm. Johnny Carson's Tonight Show was a central piece of American culture. Its tapes are a ledger of laughter, and of the moments when that laughter masked something more troubling. Re-examining those moments with honest language matters. Naming them racist is part of the work of understanding how mass media shaped attitudes and why vigilance and accountability in entertainment still matter.